welcome back to Under the Fleapit. We are still making our way through the 1910s, and today is going to be a twofer video, talking about two American short films, the gothic sci-fi horror Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and the psychological horror home invasion film, Suspense. To start, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde was written and directed by Lucius J. Henderson. Released in 1912, it's an adaptation of the play of the same name by Thomas Russell Sullivan, which is, in turn, an adaptation of the novella Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. The film stars James Cruise, Florence Labadie, Harry Benham, and Marie Aline. At 12 minutes, it's silent, and I would classify it as appropriate for ages 10 and up due to some very mild violence, mildly disturbing imagery, off-screen harm to a child, and suicide as a plot point. Published in 1886, Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is a gothic sci-fi horror novella written by the Scottish author Robert Louis Stevenson. It follows Gabriel Utterson, a lawyer in London who's concerned that his good friend, Dr. Henry Jekyll, is being blackmailed by a murderous criminal named Edward Hyde. Unbeknownst to him, Jekyll and Hyde are in fact one and the same. His friend has invented an elixir that divides his good and evil sides into separate personalities, causing him to transform into Hyde, the living embodiment of his darkest urges. Born from Stevenson's fascination with the duality of man and his personal exposure to established members of society leading violent double lives, this novella is considered a cornerstone of Gothic literature and one of the most famous pieces of British literature in general to date. In 1887, a mere year after its publication, the novella was adapted into a stage play by Thomas Russell Sullivan, who altered a great deal of the story's elements in order to more broadly appeal to general audiences. Notably, he changed it from a circular narrative into a linear one, and removed some of the characters' nuances, changing Dr. Jekyll from a reclusive doctor with a desire to indulge in vice and cruelty to a more genial, upstanding member of society who is solely undone by his own curiosity. It was from this play, which went on to run for 20 years, that Lucius J. Henderson derived much of his inspiration for this film's script, condensing the 4 acts down into a mere 12 minutes of screen time. But, interestingly, despite its age, this was not the first film adaptation of Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. That honor would actually go to the 1908 film, also titled Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which was possibly directed by Otis Turner and is now, sadly, lost. The version of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde we're talking about today was produced by the New York-based Thanhouser Company, one of the first American motion picture studios. James Cruise, who would later go on to become a well-known director in his own right, was cast to play both Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, with Harry Benham acting as his uncredited body double. Additionally, Florence Labadie was cast as Jekyll's love interest, and the child star Marie Aline was cast as the little girl that Hyde knocks over. One other piece of behind-the-scenes information we have is that Dr. Jekyll's transformation into Hyde was achieved through the combination of a dissolve, a substitution splice, makeup, and Cruise's own physicality. Ultimately, the film was released on January 16, 1912, though we aren't sure what the audience or critical reception at the time was. Hoping to test a theory, the well-respected Dr. Jekyll ingests a potion that transforms him into Mr. Hyde, the embodiment of his worst impulses. A wild scoundrel, Mr. Hyde then proceeds to terrorize the village, trampling a child and attacking various people until he finds himself cornered in Dr. Jekyll's lab. So I want to be transparent and admit that I am a massive fan of the 1886 novella. I think it's an exceptional piece of Gothic literature with complex characters and themes and an interesting narrative structure. And I know that makes me a bit susceptible to bias. However, at the same time, I actually think it's okay if an adaptation drastically changes things so long as it maintains the core themes and spirit of its source material, while keeping some story and character elements the same and making changes primarily to suit the new medium. One example of this is the 2018 cosmic horror film Annihilation, which is an adaptation of the novel Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer. The two works are wildly different from each other in terms of plot, character, and the horrors therein. But the movie maintains some of the central concepts, themes, and tone of the novel. And additionally, the film is able to stand as a great piece of art on its own. All of that said, as an adaptation, is this film successful? No, not at all. The only thing it really has in common with the novella is there's a character named Dr. Jekyll who ingests a potion and turns into a guy named Mr. Hyde. Beyond that, all plots, all characterization, all nuance, all tension, all horror is just absent. So it fails as an adaptation, but what about as a movie on its own? No. Unfortunately, the story is not successful. Without the novella's context, we don't really have a great idea of what's going on. Dr. Jekyll is just a guy who wants to prove that a man can be chemically separated into two personalities for some reason. And then when he does it, he just sort of turns into a weird asshole. I can't stress this enough. Mr. Hyde is not despicable here. He's not scary. He's not intimidating. He's just a violent weirdo that sometimes chokes people. Barely even tramples that child. He just sort of knocks her over. As the modern critic Troy Howarth said, Hyde acts more akin to, quote, an unrestrained child than a villain. There's also an entirely undeveloped subplot where Dr. Jekyll is courting a preacher's daughter, which adds nothing to the story. She doesn't really even receive a name or play much of an actual part in the story. And when your film is only 12 minutes, you just don't have time to try to tackle multiple storylines. It ends up being an unfinished mess. Now, as far as performances go, James Cruz is mostly serviceable as Dr. Jekyll, though the face he makes when transforming into Mr. Hyde is, I think, unintentionally pretty funny. But as Hyde, he just isn't right. He tries. He puts a lot into his physicality, and I give him credit for that. But he also just grimaces and bounces around in a way that's totally divorced from everything that makes the character memorable and horrific. And when your primary antagonist is the driving force of your story, you really need him to work. On a technical level, the film is decent. The editing is probably the most professional part, especially for Jekyll's transformation. And while the cinematography isn't particularly striking, there's still some varied shot types, including a painted close-up, which was pretty rare for the early 1910s. The sets are cheap, but it's clear they put effort into dressing them, and I give them props for shooting on location at points. The costumes are also passable, though hair and makeup are weird. Cinematic makeup at this point was still in its infancy. It was still very stagey, which doesn't pass well when you're filming with medium shots. Hyde's blacked out teeth in particular just look a bit silly. My biggest issue is that when all of this comes together, flaws and all, it creates something that's less than the sum of its parts. A film that is sort of just a novelty more than an adaptation or even its own story. Overall, I'm going to give Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde a 1 out of 5. I just can't get past the borderline terrible capturing of this iconic villain and the meandering story. I really wouldn't recommend it to anyone. There's just not much here to enjoy. Next up, we have Suspense, an American psychological horror home invasion film directed by Lois Weber and Philip Smalley, the former of whom also wrote the film. Released in 1913, it also stars Lois Weber as well as Valentine Paul, Douglas Gerard, Sam Kaufman, and Lowell Warrington. At just over 10 minutes, it's silent, and I would classify it as appropriate for ages 12 and up due to some mild violence, child endangerment, threatened gendered violence, and a disturbing central theme. I will also add that the film has a dated classist portrayal of an unhoused man who is labeled as a, quote, tramp. Despite the fact she's often pushed into the margins of film history, Lois Weber's importance to early American cinema cannot be overstated. With roughly 135 films to her name, she was a trailblazer, famous for her tendency to have a hand in every part of the production of her films. She was the first American woman to ever direct a feature-length film, with her 1914 adaptation of The Merchant of Venice, as well as the first woman to own a production studio, and one of the first directors ever to experiment with sound. She was also extremely artistic in her usage of camera angles, lighting, and editing in a way that put her leagues ahead of most of her contemporaries. Her life was honestly far too fascinating for me to summarize it here, but I really recommend reading Lois Weber in Early Hollywood by Shelley Stamp to learn not only about her impact on cinema, but her moral convictions and utilization of cinema as a means to spread messages of social justice. Though it should be noted that she was still a white woman in the early 1900s, meaning some of her work is quite dated and at points, in my opinion, anti-Semitic. Her co-director Philip Smalley was also her husband, as well as an established vaudeville actor who appeared in over 200 films. He made several films with Weber, though his creative contributions were notably less than hers, and they're sometimes even outright disputed, with some film historians believing her work has been unfairly attributed to him. So did he really help direct this? We're not sure, and we might never be, but technically on record the answer is yes. The information we have about the film's actual production is quite limited. We know it was somewhat influenced by the play At the Telephone by Andre Delorde, as well as some of the play's early cinematic adaptations, including 1908's Heard Over the Phone. We also know it was filmed in Beverly Hills, produced by Rex Motion Picture Company, and distributed by the Universal Film Manufacturing Company. In addition to writing, directing, and editing the film, Lois Weber also played the role of the wife, with the rest of the cast including Valentine Paul as the husband, Sam Kaufman as the tramp, Douglas Gerard as the pursuer, and Lowell Warrington as the maid. But perhaps the most notable production fact is that this film features one of the earliest usages of split screen to convey events happening simultaneously but at different locations, as well as one of the earliest car chases ever put to screen. The film was released on July 6, 1913. And many modern critics laud it for its atmosphere, tension building, and inventive shot composition. In 2020, it was selected for preservation by the Library of Congress due to its cultural, historical, and aesthetic significance, and a copy of its original print is preserved in the British Film Institute's archive. After her maid quits without warning, a young mother is left home alone with her baby while her husband is at work. To her horror, she slowly realizes a man is casing her home. Just as she calls her husband for help, the man breaks inside and drives her to flee deeper into the house. As someone who's pretty familiar with home invasion films and slashers, it was fascinating watching some of the earliest bricks being laid in the foundations of these subgenres. I mean, from the voyeuristic shot of the would-be victim through a keyhole to the cutting of the phone cord mid-call, this movie executed what would become staples of these genres so well. It feels in a lot of ways both timeless and modern in its overall construction. The plot is very simple, as those of home invasion films often are, but it's paced and executed so well that the simplicity serves it. We have all the components we need for a successful build-up and payoff. And while the characters are stock, their franticness feels real. And that's because the acting performances are mostly pretty great. Lois Weber conveys a lot of emotion as the wife, lending her quite a bit of personality despite how little she actually does on screen. And while Valentine Paul is definitely a bit weaker as far as facial acting goes, he still displays some great, almost comedic physicality. But the real standout for me has to be Douglas Gerard as the tramp or home invader. There is a casualness to his slow, malevolent approach that is genuinely unsettling to watch. This character has made up his mind. He is going to break into a home and likely murder a woman and her child, or worse. But he sees no reason to be in a rush about it. casing the home, breaking in, getting the knife. He performs all of this with this disturbingly blank yet expectant expression. He's terrifying. As an aside, I do feel I would be remiss to ignore the classism inherent in this film. The invader is officially labeled as the tramp, and his costuming makes it quite clear he is meant to be unhoused, with the main plot of the film thus acting as a middle-class horror story. A comfortably established woman and her baby, the image of domesticity, are threatened in their lovely home by the presence of a poor person. It isn't hard to see how this film, great as it may be, was thus born from classist preconceptions of the age. These are the kind of things it's worth at least acknowledging. Finally, where the film shines is in the realm of the technical. The cinematography and editing in this film are groundbreaking, employing techniques that barely existed with a level of finesse that honestly kind of shocks me. I can't imagine how Weber managed to translate such striking visuals to the screen with such little precedent. That can be said about the film's car chase, too. While this isn't the first car chase put to film, that honor goes to 1903's Runaway Match, it is still among one of the earliest, and it looks astoundingly good. The cars are captured genuinely speeding along with dynamic shots that create real tension. And I want to give a shout out to the stunt performers, too. There weren't safety regulations on set like there are today, and those men endangered themselves for their art, executing some really impressive stunts, including a person being hit by a car. Granted, this was done by speeding up footage and likely just tapping him, but that's still no small thing. This inventiveness and creative vision ultimately coalesces into a film that was just so ahead of its time, establishing thriller and slasher tropes, as I mentioned, before other filmmakers had even dreamed of putting them to the screen. And despite its short runtime, it does all of this while managing to craft a taut atmosphere, a story that you want to see the ending of. Overall, I am going to give Suspense a 4.5 out of 5. I recommend it to all fans of early horror, psychological horror, thrillers, home invasion films, and slashers. It truly is part of the beginning. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, a like and subscribe would be very much appreciated. And if you like what I do and want to support me, links to my Patreon and Ko-fi are in the description. I'm currently working on my PhD, so every dollar helps. You can follow me on Blue Sky, Instagram, and Letterboxd at Under the Fleapit. And until next time, stay spooky!